Welcome back to another episode of Enterprise AI News. I'm your host, Troy Angradon, and I'm here with my co-host, Ian Wilson. Ian, how are you?
Great. Good to see you again, Troy.
Yeah, you as well. So I understand we're going to be looking at a bunch of interesting companies in this space and trying to make sense of the ecosystem, kind of separate out the cloud AI platform providers from maybe the AI or ML platform providers from the folks who say they do AI that's kind of embedded into their applications, or even the data companies that are now sort of basically out there trumpeting that they're AI companies, and kind of helping people make sense of all that. So why don't we dive right in?
Yeah, and this is where you're going to be teaching me a lot, actually. So I'm going to be throwing this over to you because the word on everyone's lips right now is the cloud, and this is no different when it comes to AI because everybody
Right.
wants to move their analytics to the cloud
Mm-hmm.
and their data platforms to the cloud. So when I talk about AI, it generally wraps in data as well
Right.
because
Right.
obviously they sit on top of each other. So the data cloud with analytics for me is what I'm calling the AI cloud. I'm moving all that compute and storage. And I started, so obviously this is something that I think about constantly, and I'm sure most of you guys are thinking about, if you don't have a cloud, how do you move to the cloud? If you're halfway there, how do you complete the journey? What are the key points? What are the players? And that's really the staging off point here.
Right.
And I started off with it with I noticed in the news an article about Baidu that's got its own AI cloud. It's got a big cloud service and it's got an AI cloud. And it said AI. Baidu's shares soar after surprise revenue gain from AI push. And this was really talking about its stock price gaining off of great revenue off of its AI cloud.
Hmm.
So that was an interesting point. I'd also noticed something like this: AI chip startup getting another 30 million for growth. I know there's lots of AI chip startups getting growth.
There are.
And where are these chips going? Well, most of them are going to be going into data centers.
Yeah. And most
So
of those will be in public clouds. Yeah.
most of those will be in public clouds, which
Yeah.
of course is currently dominated by Nvidia. And a lot of Nvidia's revenue now is focused on AI chips. They're probably the biggest player in that space. I think that doesn't surprise anybody. And I noticed this article in the Economist recently. Very much the same kind of thing. Lots of group companies trying to come after them, but that's very much kind of at the bare metal.
Mm-hmm.
Although we'll notice later on that Nvidia's also, it seems, trying to build its own cloud platform for AI as well. But that really brought me on to looking myself at taking a deeper look at all the main players. And when I did that, you and I, Troy, have just broken these up into a number of buckets because there are a whole range of players.
Right.
And I had a bunch of questions that I'm going to throw over to Troy to take a look at um, about where do these all fit in the ecosystem. And obviously, we've got the main players that we all know. We've got AWS, Google Cloud Platform, GCP. We've got Microsoft's Azure AI.
Mm-hmm.
IBM have their Cloud Pak, their own service that I think has a lot of really great aspects. Troy is not a big fan of their service, but I think in
I
terms
am
of what they're
absolutely
doing,
not a big fan of
interesting.
their service. I think they're irrelevant at this point.
They see there's his rah rah speech. But there's a bunch of these as well as their counterparts in China. As we mentioned, Baidu has
Right.
their AI cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Tencent has their TI platform, which is basically their AI platform, as does Alibaba. So they're
Right.
almost the counterparts of AWS, GCP, and Azure
Exactly. Yeah.
over in China.
They're huge.
That's one bucket.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the big players. Where are they sitting right now, Troy?
Well, I mean, you nailed it. There are I think there's kind of this kind of handful of 10 companies, the largest 10 clouds, and they're always sort of 9 or 10, depends on who's counting. But it's all the ones you've mentioned. Some folks would throw in some of the folks you've also added to your later list, like the Salesforces and SAPs and VMwares of the world. I'd put those in a pretty different bucket. So I think there's traditional, makes me laugh to say that, but the traditional public cloud players that have been around now for 13
Mm.
years, if you go back to the beginning of Amazon, but they've all developed and grown and continued to just rocket ahead and take over in terms of like compute and data center footprint globally. And it's all the ones you mentioned. And then all of them developed their own. They were using AI. All of them were using AI internally in their operations, and then they developed customer facing AI and machine learning services, which they then resell to developers, right, for their own products. So those are definitely massive players. Not everybody's there, but anybody who's starting out building a business from scratch would start there because it's pay as you go, right? So it makes the most sense, and that's where all the fastest growth startup stuff is. If you're a bigger company, you probably are going to build a hybrid across multiple of them, or you may bring some of that stuff in house. That's a different conversation. But the 13 years that we've been doing public cloud computing, that's the beginning of scores of decades of transitioning into the cloud. And you're right, AI is no
Mm.
different from that. And I think that anybody who says they're doing AI and they're doing it in their own data center really doesn't know what they're doing at this point, because they don't have the elasticity, the ability to scale that infrastructure on demand
Yeah.
that they really need, that the cloud can give them.
So I've noticed. Obviously, this is a space that's continuously transitioning, and what I see today makes complete sense. But in the past, there was a big focus on having the cloud principally for your data, but most of your analytics was done offline in your own on-premise applications, wherever. Particularly if you had an analytics group that were used to running on their own on-premise services.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm seeing both things move to the cloud, which makes total sense because you've got your storage for your data, but now you've got your compute for your analytics. And so actually just using the cloud for data storage and then doing your analytics back at home doesn't really make a lot of sense. And it makes total sense to have them both on the cloud. So you've got your analytics there. And for me, it's not just about, and I think a few of these other players start to show this, it's not just about having all that elastic compute on the cloud so you can just scale up and down as you need, although that's a critical factor. And I saw some, typically when you think about analytics and BI, they get a batch job done. A manager will say, oh, we need this report or we need this data, and they have a batch job. Why? Well, because they can't run it on their data servers on premise, because it slows down their work that's going on day by day, their transactions. They have to run it at night. They have to run it in batch because it takes hours. And then they deliver it, say, oh, when do you want your report? You can get it next week. Well, on the cloud, you just spin up as many servers as you want to produce it in as quick a time as you want. You want it in 5 minutes? We can do that. We'll just spin up 1,000 servers and bring them down. You get your report almost in real time. So of
Well,
course that
let me
that's a,
let me caution you on that. You say that, I think that's the industry tagline, but it's not really true. If it's not
well, okay.
architected to do that, then it can't really do that.
That's the
That's the marketing more than the reality.
what's the word I'm looking for? That's the nirvana we're trying to move towards.
Yeah, for sure.
But
There's
in
definitely
addition to
there.
that,
It's possible in some cases if it's architected correctly to do that.
right,
Yeah.
right. Well, this is, I think, what we'll get to with Snowflake.
Yeah, for sure.
Is the second thing, though, I think that is also key is once we start moving onto the cloud, you can also get a lot of capabilities for sharing because you've got everybody looking at the same thing. Now, of course, you can potentially get that on premise, but I think it's much more of a native capability when you're starting to use cloud tools for analytics that you've got a single analytics view that your whole team's sharing. And I think being able to share between your teams is also another capability that moving to the cloud will start to bring in.
I think the key there is, if you have one global your internal private network, then
Mm.
sharing amongst your team, even if it's an in-house system, is totally fine. You can already do that in any application that you're using. Where it got really easy for any cloud-based SaaS application, we've been using SaaS for 20 years with Salesforce, right? Any of those kinds of things. What we found was, boy, did it ever make it easier to work with partners? because now suddenly we're
Well,
not
yes,
having to
yeah,
give them some kind of
yeah,
certification to get in through the firewall, to
yeah.
have accounts and users and permissions and manage all these complex, login issues. Whereas it's like, oh yeah, just log in with a partner account into our Salesforce account. It's already secured and contained and restricted, and they're just going to a Salesforce data center. So in terms of getting beyond your team to your broader team, i.e.
Right.
your partner network or your customers, man, that made it a million times easier being in a cloud-based anything.
So I think that brings us nicely to Snowflake. And I really like Snowflake. I really like what they're doing, particularly, obviously, they've got a massive focus on data. Um, and they've been trying to automate, data engineering, the data from data source to data consumers, what I call it, well, what most people call the data pipeline. Ingesting data, processing it, and making it available to people to use in things like data science and data applications.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really like about what they're doing is they're trying to automate all of that. So you talked about, automating, making things available to partners, but making it much simpler than plugging in your own stuff. Basically becoming a one-stop shop for both data and analytics.
Yeah.
What's your view on Snowflake?
I love them. I think they're really interesting because the challenge in, as you know, and we've talked before, like I came out of the BI space. I was at Business Objects back in the day, and we were there at the beginning as cloud was taking off, but the pattern for the last 10 years, 13 years has been keep your crown jewels, your data, in your data warehouse, in your data center. And yeah, you're going to start to put customer facing applications on the cloud, or kind of less mission critical applications on the cloud, or in some cases critical ones like Salesforce for sales. But the crown jewels, kind of the data warehouse, always stayed kind of on premises in your data center. And really, I think the innovation from Snowflake has been, we want to make data warehouses, which have traditionally been massively complex, extremely expensive to set up. We're going to make them run on every infrastructure. So we're going to run them on Google. You can see the little logos there: Google, Azure, and Amazon. We don't care which infrastructure you want to run on it. We're going to make it data warehouse as a service on any or all of those infrastructures. So we don't care which one you kind of choose as your primary or your primary and secondary vendors. We work with them, and you can basically set up a data warehouse, set up a data lake, do all your data, engineering and ETL, extract, transform, load, essentially like extracting the data and making transformations, putting it into a data warehouse. You can do all those things in their system with easy setup. And do it across those infrastructures, so it spans the multiple big clouds that are out there. So no matter which one you use, you can sort of still interact with this service. I think it's key. And the data gravity issue of like where the data grows is where it stays is huge for these guys, because they keep building data warehouses. That data will never leave. It will always be in this Snowflake set of services. And what's interesting is they are frenemies and co-opetitors with the underlying cloud companies who have their own equivalent products. But Google, BigQuery, or Amazon Redshift, if you're in there, you can get out, but it's going to take work. Whereas if you're in Snowflake running on Amazon and you want to move that to Snowflake running on Google, it's much simpler to do. So I think that what's been interesting about them is like, let's make it multi-hybrid, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and that way people are not trapped. Now they're sort of, they have a lock-in at another level, which is the data warehouse, which is sitting on those clouds. But I think they've been really innovative, really pushing forward, and just crushing the market in terms of growth and momentum.
And I think it's an important conversation for any enterprise, because so many companies I talk to, they have groups looking at what should their data architecture be, what should their pipeline be, how are they going to bring all their data together, how are they going to rationalize their databases, how are they going to build a single source of truth. And they're coming at this from the perspective of, we build the data architecture. Really what they're saying is, how do we build this? Well, of course the answer is, you don't build that, you use that.
Well, I think that you could separate that out. You're right. They're not building the underlying database, right? They're not. You're not.
No, no.
You would nobody these days would say, "Let's build our own
But
database."
trying to re-engineer their architecture to look something like this is a massive
It
undertaking.
is, yeah. And these guys are taking away a lot of the pain and a lot of the pain of, frankly, just working with the traditional data warehouse vendors that were out there. These that they're
Mm,
sort of disrupting
yeah.
by saying we're going to be cloud first, cloud only. I think it's really interesting. And Frank Slootman, who's their CEO, he does a lot of press on this. He's been really vocal about AI as being, look, it's all built on data. We all know this, and this data will be on the cloud, and AI processing will be on the cloud. We live on the three biggest clouds. AI is going to be generated. A lot of those models are going to be built, trained, and run on the three biggest clouds. So we might as well co-locate them with the data, which is in the Snowflake
Right.
infrastructure. So I think he's been really bullish and really positive on that. They've been doing a ton of investments, marketing investments. I think integration of product investments with folks like Dataiku and some of the other ML platform companies. So they're
Mm.
pushing really hard on the idea that data is growing, AI is growing, cloud is a given, and all of that, all of that makes sense together, which is what you've been saying.
Right. And I think, if you're looking to build AI on the cloud, this is your template. Now, I'm not saying go ahead and just jump straight into Snowflake, although it's a great example, but this
Right.
for me is the template. You should be looking for something like this. I mean, certainly from my perspective, when I think about everything I would want, it's basically wrapped up in most of what they've got here, and I just like the simplicity. I'm a big fan of simplicity, particularly for most enterprises, because, if your business is building jet engines, don't be spending your time doing data architecture. Nobody's buying you for that.
Right. Yeah, and to a certain degree, you still have to do some of your own. To be clear, you still have to do some of your own work in under building your own data pipelines, your own transformation pipelines,
Hmm.
your own those things that you're building with the tools. But don't build your own tools. Just build the workflows on top of the
Yeah,
tools.
right. So that's kind of an interim bucket. So we've looked at one bucket, those huge clouds.
Mm-hmm.
This is, to me, is kind of an interim bucket. And then there's what we think of as the traditional AI platform. Well, we call them traditional now. Ones we might have had on premise, like Data Robot. We've got here H2O as an
Mm-hmm.
example. These guys have had platforms that lots of companies use, but they're now building their own AI clouds because obviously they want their platform on the cloud and to make an easier offering. Um, I haven't gone into too much detail about what they're doing. Obviously, I know their platforms. What do you think about them moving? Where are they going to sit in this ecosystem?
So they came out of the gate really fast with. They're a great team. They're building the company very very quickly, doing some really interesting stuff. They really came out of the gate hard on auto ML, auto machine learning. So
Right.
automated machine
Hmm.
learning of like, hey, throw in a table of data, and it can be very big. Just bang, just drop it in there. We will automatically analyze it. We'll automatically clean it up. We'll flag duplicates. We'll extract data. We'll break dates up. We'll
Hmm.
normalize the data. We'll basically do a lot of basic data preparation dynamically and kind of automatically, and then run some analysis and try to build models and build a leaderboard and say, okay, look, we've run a bunch of models. We know what your what your output is, what you need at the end. So let us build a bunch of models and test a bunch of models, and then build a leaderboard and say, okay, we found the right algorithm
Yeah.
with the right parameters. We think this is going to give you an 85% positive prediction capability, and the rest are sort of like in the queue if you want to use them. But really, this is probably the best of the bunch. So takes away a lot of the data science. It's
Yeah.
really data science for the sort of citizen data scientist of
I,
give me the
I could
data,
show you
clean it,
my I could show
let me
you my
build some models.
bash scripts I did back in the day to do AutoML. Not pretty.
Yeah, exactly. And it's shocking.
You
I
don't
mean,
want to go
it's
there.
crazy how fast it is. I mean, I've literally thrown CSV files in and let it run for 2 minutes, and then it's like, hey, we ran 80 tests, and here's your best model. It's shocking. It's pretty cool stuff. And they've then integrated Paxata for the data prep side, and they bought Algorithmia on the ML platform side to sort of backfill some missing gaps in there. So they're really going.
Where do they fit in this overall ecosystem?
So
Yeah,
just think of them
with
as
this
an ML
cloud.
platform company.
Mm.
So think of Amazon SageMaker as a cloud-specific ML platform. This is a I'm going to say cloud agnostic for a sec, but I'm going to put a huge asterisk on that because my understanding,
Yeah.
and it could be wrong and it could have changed, I haven't looked at it for a while, was originally I think all of this was built on Amazon. So when you
Mm.
clicked the button and said do the auto ML, it went off and spun up a whole pile of servers, ran a bunch of stuff in parallel, and then spun them down somewhere in the background. And I believe that was on Amazon, but that's underneath the infrastructure, and you as
Mm.
a user don't buy it, pay for it, or maintain it. Now, they may still be built on Amazon. I don't know.
So I assume that they're looking at, obviously one of their main constituents will be current users of Data Robot. They've got it on premise and they want a cloud version.
I don't.
Um,
I don't know that it ever ran on premise.
oh, really?
I
Am I
could be
thinking
wrong
that?
on that. They may have had like you may have been able to run small instances of it. I think that was the case, but I don't think you could run a lot at scale because it required quite a bit of infrastructure. I think you had to set up. I'm kind of speaking out of my ears on this. I don't remember the specific options that were available at the time. Just freeze that one for a sec. What do they? They don't. Yeah, it's too marketing architecture looking. Private cloud, public cloud, edge. So it looks like they do let you run it in multiple places. And if that's true, then maybe it was their demo setup that they were running on Amazon,
Mm.
and that
Mm.
you could deploy it on Google and on Azure and in your private cloud, whatever Kubernetes infrastructure you're using. I
Right.
don't know. I'd have to dig into the documentation on that. But think of them as a multi. In that case, think of them as a multi-cloud or multi-infrastructure horizontal ML platform company. So, like Snowflake is a database as a service company that runs on multiple infrastructures, think of this as an ML platform that runs on multiple infrastructures.
So with these, it's more of a roll your own in effect, in that you're going to put this with a data, some kind of data solution. This is your preferred machine learning building solution. You might have a few other tools. So whereas Snowflake is kind of all in one, this is a bit more roll your own, as is H2O, which is very similar. So
Well,
those,
so no, I backtrack again just for a sec. So where I would say that it's this is an end-to-end ML platform like
Mhm.
H2O, and it is inherently running on multiple infrastructures. And you're right, the data has to come from somewhere. So it could come from your Snowflake, which is a data
Right.
warehouse, and data lake as a
Yep. Yep.
service, which could be also on those
Yep.
cloud infrastructures. It could come from there. It could come from anywhere. Basically, you can gather data from all the different source types or source locations. So really, just the simplest layer, Snowflake is really a data infrastructure as a service on multiple clouds, and Data Robot is a machine learning platform, end to end platform, basically,
Mm.
that sits on multiple infrastructures, and it has to pull data from somewhere, probably multiple places.
And it's probably moving backwards into enhancing that data source ingestion, data space, whereas Snowflake is moving forward into the data science area to add that onto the front end of its data offering.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think you're probably correct in the sense that the data, the Snowflake folks are like, great, we have the data, we've sourced it, we've merged it, we've put it into the data warehouse or the data lake. Well, what else are our customers wanting to do with it? They probably want to do some initial data preparation and potentially some model development. They may or may not. I don't know how far
Yeah,
up they go into that, but that really
right.
crosses over into Data
So
Robot
pretty
H2O's
far, and this is what
territory.
I've been reading, particularly with looking at what they're doing with data science, is that's their main focus. And you mentioned their CEO talking a lot about AI, and it's very natural, and it's nice also to split these up um, almost philosophically. I like to think as data, the output of data as being, when you're in the AI space, as being data that's fit for purpose. That is data that's ready to use to build a model.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of work that goes into that.
there is, right.
And so you could have an entire data platform that's only output is data that's fit for purpose. And
Well,
that's a nice separation of concerns, because that's the starting point then for something like potentially like Data Robot. I mean, maybe they go backwards beyond that, but they need to start with that fit for purpose data
so
and then
I
take
have
that.
a huge caveat there. Flip back to the other slide for a sec. And what's interesting to me is when you clicked on the data science logo and it popped up there and it now says data science, simple data preparation for modeling with your framework of choice. So what that says
Oh,
to me is they don't do any modeling. They don't. They may integrate with, but essentially it's data prep. So it's kind
right.
of like the Paxata company and product that
Okay,
Data
maybe I was
Robot bought.
reading about something they want to be doing. Um,
Yeah, data science. They're calling it data science. I don't call that data science. I call that data prep.
I don't call it data science. I don't think anybody calls that data science. I'm pretty sure
I think
um,
it may be aspirational.
maybe I've been reading what they're looking to do.
Yeah. So anyway, I think you're right. There is this. There's the data infrastructure as a service sitting on multiple clouds. There's a machine learning platform infrastructure, which is again sitting on multiple clouds. Those two have some interaction back and forth.
Mm,
And H2O would be another example of one of those horizontal end-to-end machine learning platform companies
yeah,
that can do everything from ingest the data to clean it, to prepare it, to train the models, to deploy the models and put them into production. It also probably runs on multiple infrastructures. So think of
I'm pretty sure it does.
H2O and Data Robot, especially their new AI cloud, as being essentially competitors to Google's Vertex or Amazon's
Right,
SageMaker.
SageMaker. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings us on to what another bucket, and these are the Salesforce's SAPs that have
Mm-hmm.
also got now their own AI cloud platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And but these are not, these are not like your Google or your AWS, are they? They're a little bit different with a
They're a
bit of
different animal. Like what do we have here? Like this is Salesforce Einstein. So what is it? Discover services that help you create customized AI powered apps. Essentially, these heavyweight ERP companies, right? Salesforce, 20 years of SaaS products, and SAP being whatever they are, 30 years or something of very heavyweight enterprise resource planning application suites. And they're essentially saying we have some new AI services, and they're kind of shoehorning them in. There's nothing wrong with that because a lot of people will kind of use AI just by using the applications that are kind of in their browser.
Yeah,
So I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think it's really good to know like who is the end customer, who pays you, and what are they paying for. In this case, they probably already have a Salesforce, whatever, Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, pick one of their many products. They are already paying for licenses for that. They may or may not have to pay a little extra to get some of these features. I don't know. But they're
mm-mm.
kind of buying some AI kind of features in the background that are plugged into their existing applications.
Some
So they're really
capability.
for the end users, right? Not for the developers, which is
So I think that's interesting because to me, this is where everything will move. The focus today on building models will and should eventually disappear. I mean, imagine nobody today builds a model to understand English language because it's already been built, you
right.
know, and it's been built way better than you can build it
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So almost nobody would do that at
Right.
that low level.
Right.
And you end up going higher up the stack when you're talking about building models. But when you're getting into this level, this business application level, um, there will come a time when you don't need to build any models at all. The model
Right.
that comes out of the box is good enough for what you need.
Yes.
When somebody has,
In
for
a lot of cases.
example, a model that can understand pretty much any invoice you throw at it and pull off all the data like the tax and the commodities and the address, you don't need to build your own.
No.
Somebody's done that. And what we're in this stage right now where you can get a lot of those applications, but often they come with, they're almost like a template. You have to start with that and then tweak it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That will go. And eventually we'll come to this stage where you just click on an application and it does a business function.
Yeah.
And this is what I call
Exactly.
business function as a service,
Yeah.
where and that's this maturing curve. But what we've seen so far with these clouds is different entry points. How far do you need to go? What do you want to do? Do you have something that perhaps most business functions today nobody's built a model for? So you're basically out of luck there. If you want it, you have to build it for yourself. But a lot of things that people have built something for. So I think it very much depends. What are you trying to do?
Yeah. And I don't know that you could say that they haven't built a model for it, but are there I think there's a really cool concept that Andrew Ng has been promoting, which is kind of this idea of like foundational models, right? The GPT-3s of the world, or the their
I think it
Adalis,
depends.
or
I mean, it depends on the you. If you've got, for example, some workflow or production line that's entirely unique to you, nobody does what you do, and you've got something in there. You're making these widgets nobody else makes. Um, I mean, obviously at that level, nobody's done it, but there's so much work to do, so many things that probably nobody's touched yet, or even if they have, they did it in-house. They built their own model. It's not available to you anyway. You can't get
right,
your hands on it. Um,
right.
so we're still in this stage where most things to date, even if they have been done, they're not anything like this, where it's kind of public and you can actually go and get it.
Yeah, these have
But
been turned into literally application
it
features.
turned into an application, yeah.
I mean, way up the stack here. We're not even just like buying a whole application. We're buying an extra function, as you said, a function as a
Almost a
service.
business function, but it's starting to happen. And of course, where will it happen? It happens on the ones that are most high volume, like as I mentioned, reading invoices. Everybody does that. Everybody
Right.
needs it. You know, building nuts and bolt widgets. Not everybody needs that.
Yeah.
So it very much depends what you want. But over time, they will come.
Yeah, there are a ton of applications. Again, I'd probably just push back on that. I think a lot of these models have been built for many, many, many things, if not to solve your exact problem, to solve something really close to it. And they're available, and they're published, and you can just go get them
Yeah, but
out of
the
GitHub. And
something close is kind of outside the state of the art of AI at the moment. That's where we're going to these, as you mentioned, the general purpose models, the what's the word? Not transform. Oh God, I've forgotten the word. Where we can use one model that's trained on something similar, as you mentioned.
transfer learning.
Thank you. Make me look like a noob.
Even though you've been doing this 25 years longer than I have,
Transfer learning is quite new anyway.
you're forgiven.
But that's coming, and that will start accelerating this process where you've got something similar. But that's very much kind of on the edge, and most things are not.
I'm gonna push back. So a lot of the stuff that Andrew's documenting with Landing Edge and Landing AI, I mean, they're doing this right now. Their whole pitch is
But you're talking
nobody
about somebody leading edge there.
for sure. But I think the general premise is, look, the community, the industry, certainly before I got involved, have been building models for so many applications, general purpose applications, for the last 10 to 15 years. They're so good, and there are so many available sitting in open source repositories that you can grab and then just finish the training. They are 95% baked. Then give them a little extra data and
I'm
you're
going to
done.
push back on that because you push back on my cloud stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm rolling my sleeves up
Push
now.
away.
I think
That's what makes this conversation useful, I think.
I think you're right, but what my focus is usually on the enterprise,
Yeah.
and those guys don't go digging around GitHub. They're not
Totally fair call. I
they're
agree.
not the
100%.
Silicon Valley community. I absolutely agree with you. I'm sure if you went digging around, you could find something to kickstart you and get you 70, 80% of the way you need to be. What's missing, I think, in this world today is an easy repository of those things, because they're changing so quickly as well. And another problem for an enterprise is, you don't, what data was that trained on? Is somebody going to have to go and look through that?
Right.
How was it done? Would you trust it?
Those are really good questions.
Maybe not. I'm not really too sure. I think that's if you're in Silicon Valley building a startup, you absolutely should be digging around GitHub and pulling everything you can, because that's mostly going to do what you need. I think if you're in an enterprise, that's a bit of, even from a policy and a regulatory perspective, that's probably a bit of a tough call. You might.
But I think you do a different thing. If you're an enterprise developer, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be going to Amazon or any one of these cloud providers who's one level up. Not getting their SageMaker. That's not what you need to do. You need to go get their Doc Analytics module, which is already pre-trained and already vetted,
that's what I think will happen.
Just pay them for that.
Yeah, I think that's where we're going to be. If we're not there already, that's very soon where we'll be. Where you can buy something from Amazon that gets you most of the way there.
Or any of their competitors. Contract analytics. There are
Exactly. Yeah.
50 places you can go, maybe not 50, there are at least 10 or 20 places you can go to get a contract analytics AI function that literally just reads contracts, decomposes them, and then dumps out data and says, here are the 5
And
million contracts and here are all the dimensions of them.
contracts
It's a
is
solved
one
problem.
that's even, I would say, saturated at the moment. There are so many. And for some reason, everybody wants to do contracts. But I think it's a more interesting point here that you bring up is if you are a business, you don't start by looking at something you think needs AI and going to talk to your data scientist. You go out and you look out on the web and you see what's the highest level service I can get.
Yeah,
Can I get
exactly.
something that just takes in my data, spits me back the answers, and I don't do a damn thing? If you
Because if you can
can,
buy it as a SaaS application,
that's
which
where
you
you
can do
go.
with contract analytics, you do it and you drag in literally 10,000 contracts. You wait 10 minutes and it goes, ta da, I'm done. I've processed them all.
And that's where you should be. And then you only start stepping back
Yeah,
if you can't find that. So,
right.
okay, well, what I want is a bit different. There's something similar, but I've got to do a bit of tweaking. Okay, then you go to that level.
Yeah,
Okay, there's nothing at all like what you want. Okay,
yeah.
then I need to go to, Data Robot, H2O, SageMaker, whoever, and build my own model. But you'll only go there from stepping back because you couldn't find something that actually did it
That was a
for you.
user-facing application.
I use
I
the
ran,
phrasing
I ran into
application.
this. I got pulled in. Our team got pulled in on a project where a vendor called us and said, "Hey, can you meet with this customer?" And when we dug into what we realized is the customer had a very simple project. We have all these support tickets. We're trying to improve our customer service, reduce our support resolution times, and improve our net promoter score, all of these standard things. And we would like to read, understand, and route these tickets faster and escalate them more appropriately, more quickly to the correct teams.
Yeah.
This is a very well tried and true and tested sort
Very,
of
very,
use case
very
for
well.
NLP, right?
Yeah.
And they were trying to do the entire thing from scratch and build their own models by training it on
This
their
blows
data.
my
And we
mind
just said
because
that's a
everybody
complete
tries to
waste of
do
time.
that. Why? Because the data science team wants to build it.
That was kind of what it came down to. And the reality was we said this is an inappropriate use of this stuff is solved. You can buy a bunch of products off the shelf that do exactly this. So you should
Yeah.
do that. Solve it at the highest level possible.
Solve it at the highest level possible. So I just like to actually end that with a note just about, because we kicked off with Nvidia, and I mentioned that they're be interesting to see if some of them can jump in the comments to see where are you guys going with an end-to-end cloud native suites of AI data and analytics software, because obviously we think about Nvidia as just producing the chips.
No, I mean they've got a massive software stack. They are extremely comprehensive in terms of a software stack, which
So
comes along for the ride with the hardware, but it's a very comprehensive
it does.
stack.
And what I think is interesting about Nvidia, when I look at, for example, their demos and their research reports for a lot of stuff they do, particularly in the kind of game animation space, incredibly cutting edge.
Yeah,
So I think where these
they're super
guys,
cool.
because of their DNA and their genesis, where they might have an edge is on the real kind of cutting edge stuff, which we tend to think on the AI space a lot of Google because they have more R&D PhDs than the rest of the university enterprise put together. But Nvidia always comes up with really interesting kind of cutting edge stuff. So I'm interested to just follow on that. I wasn't actually aware that they were building a software stack on top. So I pulled this in just kind of the last minute one because this is something I will be keeping an eye on just to see what they're doing, because they always come up with something interesting.
What I think is super interesting about NVIDIA is they really are this AI infrastructure base layer. And so they are providing at the very foundational level, really high performance compute and storage. And that's optimized. It says right there, optimized for AI, but that can mean a lot of things. It's marketing speak. But then they've got all of the AI tooling on top. So they've got ML platforms, and you can see a little diagram of all their tools. But they if you're building a complex, autonomous vehicle research, you're doing any of these kinds of things, you have a bunch of their hardware in there, and you're using a bunch of their stack in order to build your applications.
Mm,
And you mentioned Google. Well, Google has a lot of Nvidia in their data centers, and so does Amazon, and so does
right.
Microsoft. And you can actually go to, let's say, Amazon and turn on your Nvidia chip, instances, and you can drive some of your process, some of your training loads or your inference, production inference loads onto the Nvidia chips from your Amazon account, which, because those things are sitting in the Amazon data center and they're kind of split out on a multi-tenanted fashion so they can be distributed to multiple users. It's pretty crazy. So they're essentially you're accessing their GPUs, and
Mm,
then Google came along and they're like, wow, these are really great. We think we can do something interesting. So they built their TPUs, their tensor processing units, which are kind of the same idea. But this whole space, Samba Nova is another one in this space. There are a lot of companies with a lot of funding jumping in to build really purpose specific hardware.
mm,
Qualcomm's doing a ton of interesting space, a ton of interesting things in the space, more for the mobile. So edge,
yeah,
AI on edge chips in smartphones and things like that.
that's
There's a
interesting
lot
because
of really cool stuff happening in the space.
this is an interesting recommendation for a lot of the companies I work with, advising deep tech AI startups. Not exactly my area, but I tend to advise them mainly on their enterprise strategy. But I'm working with a number of companies, and they all have a component of deep technology. A lot of it's hardware, and a lot of it requires optimization. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of their value proposition is because they can do something faster and
Mm-hmm.
cheaper.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of people that run on these kind of systems,
Yeah.
because this is really cutting edge. I mean, this enterprise architecture they've put here is a world away from, you know, this very high level diagram
Right.
that Snowflake's doing. Now, obviously, Snowflake has probably something
They have
sophisticated,
something similar at that level. Yeah. Their
but
technical
they're
infrastructures.
not pitching at those people. If
Right.
you look at this, you can tell who they're pitching at.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
somebody who understands what Nvidia Tau toolkit is, somebody that understands what
Exactly.
a tensor is.
Yeah.
You know, your enterprise manager doesn't know what that is.
No. Yeah,
Your
they're selling to
business,
the hardcore engineering leaders.
that's trying to optimize something where that optimization is what actually makes the business. These are the guys that want to run on this level of innovation, and I think they're the kind of people I think this really can appeal to, and I think that's where I like what they do, because again they bring something new to the table.
It's a super interesting space, and I think what's interesting about all the stories we talked about today, just to wrap up, because I think we're at the end of the session, but I think is that all this stuff overlaps, right? To
Mm,
summarize all of this, yes, you have the big cloud players. They would love to lock you in and just say, just use our stack, just use our compute storage hardware database, and then just program with our services and all that. And that will work for some folks. Other folks say, well, I want to work across multiple of those, or I want to do data warehouse, but I don't want to go with Amazon's version. I'm going to go with more of a universal version like a Snowflake. So I'm going to build my data lakes, my data warehouse with a Snowflake, which means I can sort of move it around if I ever choose to do so to other cheaper infrastructure, or for whatever reason you want to move it. And then, but they're tied, right? Snowflake is like a frenemy or co-opetitor with those cloud providers. Then you've got the ML platform companies, which again are running on those clouds and competing with those cloud players' machine learning platforms
mm.
themselves. So there's some co-opetition there, or competition there, I should say. And then you've got the sort of
Co-opetition, is that a
what
word?
what's that?
Co-opetition.
Co-opetition is definitely a word. That's more competition directly for which platform are you going to use. And then you get the sort of the Salesforces and the SAPs that say, hey, we're sprinkling AI in there. Again, nothing wrong with it, because if you can solve a problem by using an AI-based function in your Salesforce app, great. That's faster than trying to build a model. So I think it's what's interesting about all of that, and then tying together this piece, the hardware acceleration companies, Samanova, Nvidia, there are a bunch more. You mentioned a startup in this space. They're way down at the bottom saying, we're going to build all this optimized, super fast hardware, custom built, purpose specific built to make this rest of this stack faster. So it's a very integrated and very interesting and rapidly evolving ecosystem.
Mm. and I learned a lot. So that was useful for me today.
Excellent. It's also helpful for me to like think about all these companies and go, well, how do they relate, and what is that relationship? So yeah, hopefully this was useful to somebody else as well, but it was even
Yeah,
helpful to
yeah.
me.
The other key point is how it's all maturing. So you've got to constantly keep on top of it because
Yeah,
it's changing. So it's always it's always important to look at not just where they are today, but what are the trajectories? Where
right.
is it all going, and what does that mean for me as a business? What essentially, how does it make my life easier as it
Right.
evolves?
And how do we future proof ourselves? Which of these vendors do we pick and why? And are we
Mhm.
locked in? And if we're locked in and that's okay, we're making that conscious decision to lock into one or not. And how do we build that over time? And that's a whole other set of conversations. So we'll have to wrap for today. But thanks, Ian. That was fun. And for everybody who's watching, hopefully you're still here. And if you enjoyed this episode, then please, you know the usual, know how the internet works. If you can like it, comment, share it, do all those things. That really helps us
Yeah,
out.
would love to hear
And
your comments.
yeah, throw comments in. That would be great, and we'll respond. And I guess we'll see you all on the next episode. Thanks,
Yeah,
Ian.
bye.
Bye bye.